I'm Sawyer Adams. I restore historic houses, and I found a 150-year-old farmhouse that was perfect. It had one even more perfect feature. It was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I thought that meant I was safe. I was wrong. This is the story of how an HOA president tried to steal my home out from under me and the war that followed. Before I could even think about paint colors or porch swings, there was the cleanup. The place was a wreck, but a beautiful one. The first time I saw it, it was covered in ivy, half the roof was caved in, and a raccoon ran out the front door like it was his morning jog. I knew I had to have it. This one wasn't about profit. The place was 150 years old and had belonged to a Civil War veteran who built it with his own hands. I bought it at county auction for next to nothing. Decades of neglect had turned the inside into a time capsule of decay. Old newspapers from the 1980s were piled in a corner, brittle and yellow. The kitchen, well, let's just say the raccoon wasn't the only tenant. But that's the part one love. The challenge. Stripping a place down to its bones, seeing the good craftsmanship that's held it together for a century and a half, and knowing you're the one who gets to bring it back. The first 2 weeks were bliss. Just me, a dumpster, and a lot of hard work. I salvaged the original, wide plank hardwood floors, mapped out the new electrical, and started reframing the collapsed section of the roof. It was tough, quiet work. The only sound was my hammer and the birds. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just another flip, it was a sanctuary. And then, a few weeks into the restoration, the peace was broken. I was elbowed deep in rotten floorboards when I heard the crunch of heels on gravel. It was a sound that just didn't belong out here. I turned just as a woman in pastel pink slacks and oversized sunglasses marched up my driveway like she had a warrant in her purse. "You can't be here," she said flatly, arms crossed. "This isn't approved." "I definitely can," I replied, brushing sawdust off my jeans. "I own it." She flinched like I'd cursed at her. "I'm Deborah, HOA president." I blinked. "This isn't in the HOA." She gave a tight smile. "It's part of the historic influence zone. That means we have oversight." "No," I said slowly, "it doesn't." I checked the parcel maps 3 times before I even bid at the auction. This lot was never included. It's not part of Oakage Estates. Deborah's eye twitched. "The maps are outdated. The zone is a recent addendum to our bylaws, approved by the board to protect the aesthetic integrity of the community. An addendum can't just absorb private property, Deborah. That's not how deeds work. This law has been independent for over 100 years. We'll see about that," she said, her voice dropping an octave. I watched her storm off, her heels digging into my gravel like she was trying to wound the land itself. I figured that'd be the end of it. A cranky neighbor with a power trip. Spoiler, it wasn't. A week later, I got a letter taped to my door. Not mailed, taped. It was on Oakage Estates' letterhead, complete with a cease and desist for unauthorized architectural modifications. I chuckled. The farmhouse had no electricity, and half the siding was gone. What was I supposed to get authorization for? Removing a raccoon? I tossed the letter and kept working. That's when the real chaos started. Code inspectors started showing up. Not one, but 3 different ones, all summoned by anonymous tips. First, it was the electrical inspector, who was confused because the power wasn't even connected to the grid yet. "What am I supposed to inspect? Your extension cords?" he asked. Then the plumbing inspector, who I had to show the brand new PX lines I was running. Finally, the structural guy came out 3 times in 2 days. He'd walk around, sigh, and check the same support beam I had already reinforced. On his 3rd visit, he finally pulled me aside and said, "Look, man, I know what this is. She's trying to scare you. Your permits are in order. Your work is solid. You're fine. Just keep your permits on hand." I thanked him, genuinely grateful. But if Deborah thought a few code inspections would scare me off, she had no idea what was coming next. Then the surveyor showed up. He looked embarrassed. He knocked politely, introduced himself, and said, I was hired by a Deborah Lingston, HOA president. Of course she did, I muttered. He handed me a map. She says, your property was incorrectly recorded and technically falls under HOA regulation. I stared at the map. It was a photocopy of the county plat, but a new, thick red line had been drawn by hand through my parcel, curving it into Oakage Estates like a bad Photoshop job. You know this is fake, right? I asked. He nodded, not meeting my eye. I'm just here to confirm the boundary. My official reading, based on the GPS markers, confirms the county records. Your property line is exactly where you think it is. He pointed to the old stone wall that separated my lot from the rest of Oakage. That's the line. Always has been. He handed me his official report. You'll want to keep this. That should have been the nail in the coffin. But Deborah wasn't done. 2 days later, I came home from picking up or claimed would to find a for sale sign on my lawn. My name wasn't on it. Oakage Estates really. My blood went cold. Seeing that sign on my lawn, with a stranger's name on it, it wasn't just annoying anymore. It felt like a violation. That's when the anger turned into something else. Pure determination. I ripped it out of the ground, marched across the street to where Deborah was watering her roses, and dropped the sign at her feet. What is this? She barely looked up. We've received a claim that the farmhouse was improperly acquired. Until the matter is resolved, we're preparing to list it for community redevelopment. You're insane, I snapped. You don't own this land. You don't govern it. And if you touch anything on my property again, I'm calling the cops. Actually, scratch that. I'm calling my lawyer. She finally looked me in the eye. Oh, I think you'll find the laws on our side. She turned and walked inside like she just delivered a mic drop. That's when I realized she wasn't bluffing. Deborah Langston was trying to steal my house, and she was using the HOA to do it. So I did the only thing I could. I called my cousin Olivia Gutierrez. She's an assistant district attorney, and she hates HOAs. Olivia arrived the next morning in a navy blazer and jeans, with a legal pad under one arm and a look that said she'd already skipped past annoyed and landed squarely on Warpath. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Show me the deed, she said, stepping over a stack of reclaimed window frames. I handed it to her along with the parcel maps and my renovation permits. She flipped through the documents, nodded once, and said, "This is airtight." She's got no legal standing. She says she does, I replied, gesturing vaguely toward the HOA entrance across the street. And she's got the gall to act like she's already won. Olivia pulled her phone and started snapping photos of everything. The mailbox, the property markers, the old stone wall that separated my lot from the rest of Oakage Estates. We're going to document every inch. If she tries to take this to court, we bury her in evidence. I followed her to the fence line where she crouched and tapped the base of my original boundary marker with her pen. These were installed in the 1970s, long before the HOA was even incorporated. She doesn't have a leg to stand on, but she's banking on you giving up before it gets that far. She put a fake listing sign on my yard yesterday. Olivia's brow furrowed. That's criminal misrepresentation. And putting realty on it? She's implying she has the right to broker a sale. That's a whole other level of illegal. She's already sent code enforcement after me 3 times. They're not buying it, but she keeps trying. She's escalating, Olivia said quietly. She's not just trying to intimidate you. She's laying groundwork for something bigger. That afternoon, Olivia filed a cease and desist letter on my behalf, citing property interference and false claims of ownership. She hand-delivered it to the Oakage Estates' board office, which was located inside what used to be a model home turned petty kingdom headquarters. I tagged along mostly to witness the show. The interior looked like a pottery barn exploded. A board member with a Bluetooth headset tried to block us at the door, but Olivia brushed past him like he was furniture. Deborah was seated at a long glass table typing on a tablet. She looked up briefly, surprised, then returned her gaze to the screen. "You're trespassing," she said without looking up again. "No," Olivia said calmly. "We're delivering legal notice. You've made fraudulent claims about property ownership and attempted to list land you do not control. That's real estate fraud." Deborah finally glanced up. "I'm acting under the authority of the association." "You don't have jurisdiction," Olivia replied. "Your HOA map doesn't include that parcel. And if you continue these tactics, you'll be facing a civil suit, possibly criminal charges." Deborah's expression didn't change, but something in her posture stiffened. She glanced toward a man in a tan polo shirt sitting at the end of the table. He cleared his throat. Let's not escalate this. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Olivia set the letter on the table. There's no misunderstanding. Leave my client's property alone. We thought we had them dead to rights. But on the way out, I saw something that proved this was bigger than just my property and that we were already one step behind. I caught a glimpse of a whiteboard tucked behind a filing cabinet. It had a list of parcels written across the top with my address circled in red marker. Next to it was a note. Strategic acquisition vote pending. I stopped. That's my property. Olivia turned and looked. Take a photo, she said sharply. Now. I did. That night, I installed 2 motion-activated cameras in the trees near the gate just in case. It was a good call. 3 nights later, at 2 in the morning, someone drove a landscaping truck up the gravel path and started unloading wooden stakes and orange flag markers. They worked fast, 2 figures in hooded sweatshirts, moving with practiced efficiency. I watched from the upstairs window while the cameras recorded everything. By dawn, my property was littered with plastic flags. A laminated notice was zip-tied to my fence. Survey in progress, Oakage Community Development Project. I forwarded the footage to Olivia. The next day, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He looked tired. I heard you've got a trespassing issue, he said. I nodded. And possibly attempted land theft. He followed me around the property while I pointed out the markers, the laminated sign, and the camera footage. After watching 10 minutes of the video, he let out a low whistle. Whoever this is, they're acting like they already own the place. They don't. He took notes, then said, I'll file an incident report. Might want to press charges if you catch them again. I want to. He paused. You know the HOA president personally? Unfortunately. He shook his head. This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about her, but this is the boldest move yet. Usually it's fines for the wrong shade of beige. Later that afternoon, Olivia filed a formal police report for criminal trespass and presented the footage to the county clerk's office. She also filed an injunction request to prevent the HOA from setting foot on my property. I had them on camera. I had the police report. I thought it was finally over. Then I checked my mailbox and realized the $47,000 lien was just their opening move in a whole new game. I found it the next morning, an official-looking envelope from the Oakage Estates Legal Committee. Inside was a single-page document titled Notice of Lien Intent. They were trying to fine me for noncompliance with community standards and had calculated back dues for an HOA I had never joined. Total, $47,000. For an HOA I didn't belong to. For a second, the world just spun. This wasn't harassment. It was a financial siege designed to break me. Before we could even respond to the lien, Deborah called a special board meeting. This time she invited the press. I found out when a newsman pulled up to the edge of the cul-de-sac and started filming her giving a statement in front of a small crowd of Oakage residents. This historic home, she said, gesturing behind her without naming me, is part of our community's heritage. We've discovered clerical errors in the original property filings. The association is stepping in to preserve this valuable site.
I walked up behind the cameras and waited for her to notice me. When she did, her face froze. You're lying to the press, I said loud enough for the microphones to catch. You don't own this land. You're not preserving anything. You're trying to steal it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One older man in a fishing vest shook his head and muttered, "Not again." Olivia stepped forward and handed a folder to the producer from the local news station. Here's the real story. Deeds, maps, and a police report from 3 nights ago. The HOA president is under investigation for trespassing and fraudulent property claims. The cameraman zoomed in on Deborah, who turned on her heel and walked straight back to her golf cart. 2 board members followed, whispering to each other. That night, the footage aired on the evening news. I watched it from my living room while replacing window trim. The headline read, "Homeowner fights back against overreaching HOA." That should have been enough. But the lien was still sitting on my table. Olivia read the letter, then sat back in my dining chair and exhaled slowly. They just made a fatal mistake. she said, her voice quiet. What do we do? This isn't a fine, it's a fraudulent debt. They filed it through a system that crosses state lines. That transforms their petty bullying into federal wire fraud. Now we can bring in the big guns. She stood. They wanted a legal war. Let's give them one. I looked out the window at the house I'd poured months of work into. The siding was restored. The roof was new. And the porch swing I'd built by hand creaked softly in the breeze. They weren't taking it. Not now. Not ever. I didn't sleep that night. While the farmhouse creaked under the wind and my tools sat quiet in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table with Olivia, combing through the lien notice line by line. The document claimed I owed back dues for community maintenance, security oversight, and a special assessment for civic beautification. All nonsense, all fabricated. I've never signed a thing with them, I said, pacing the length of the floor I just refinished. I've got no covenant, no agreement, not even a welcome packet. They know, Olivia said. She was cross-referencing the parcel number in the lien with county records. They're counting on the average person not knowing how this works. Most folks panic when they see legal threats. They pay up or move out. But you're not most folks. She tapped her pen against the table. They filed this through a third-party collections vendor. That vendor operates across state lines. That makes it interstate fraud.
I blinked. That's federal. Exactly. By noon the next day, Olivia had contacted the state's Department of Consumer Protection. We submitted a formal complaint, noting the fraudulent lien, the unapproved survey work, and the HOA's attempt to sell property they didn't own. Then she called someone she hadn't spoken to in years, a former law school classmate now working in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District. By that evening, I had a voicemail from a federal investigator asking if I could meet the next day. I said yes. The meeting was held at a federal building downtown, a place with metal detectors and marble floors so polished you could see the ceiling lights in them. Olivia and I sat across from a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Special Agent Corwin. He listened, barely blinking, as Olivia laid out the entire chronology. The pastel pink suit, the historic influence zone, the code inspectors, the fake hand-drawn map, the for sale sign, the cease and desist, the whiteboard photo, the 2 a.m. surveyors, the police report, the press conference, and finally, the $47,000 fraudulent lien. She placed each piece of evidence on the table like a playing card in a game she intended to win. When she showed him a copy of the listing agreement filed under Oakage Estates Really, he finally leaned forward. And this property was never part of the HOA, he asked. No, I said. It predates the community. I've got original deeds and boundary surveys going back to the 1930s. He nodded once and stood. We'll need copies of everything. And I'm going to need access to your security footage. We handed over a flash drive. Corwin didn't say much else. But as we left, I noticed him dialing a number with the kind of urgency that suggested something had just clicked into place. Back at the farmhouse, I noticed something strange. The flags and survey stakes were gone. No trace, no debris, just clean soil where they used to be. Whoever removed them had done it carefully. That meant they knew they'd been caught. An hour later, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside the farmhouse. Agent Corwin stepped out, flanked by 2 other agents. One carried a document case. We need to walk your perimeter again, he said. As we moved along the property line, Corwin pointed to the stone wall that separated my land from Oakage Estates. This is original, built in the 1860s, I said. The HOA's boundary starts 40 feet beyond that tree line. He nodded. We've reviewed the footage. The individuals who entered your land and posted the fraudulent sign were members of the HOA's Architectural Review Board. Olivia's eyes narrowed. That's a coordinated act, not just a rogue board president. We're treating it as organized property fraud, Corwin said, especially since they filed similar liens on other homes along your street. Homes also outside the HOA boundary. I froze. So, I'm not the only one. No, he said. We've identified 4 others. 3 paid the liens. 1 moved out. Olivia muttered something under her breath. Corwin turned to me. We're preparing a subpoena for the HOA's internal communications, financial records, and board meeting transcripts. Do you happen to know if they've recorded any of their meetings? They love recording themselves, I said. I saw a camcorder on a tripod during last week's emergency board meeting. He smiled. That's helpful. By the end of the week, the federal investigation was underway. Subpoenas were served to the HOA office, Oakage Estates Really, and the personal email accounts of 4 board members, Deborah included. And that's when things got really weird. Saturday morning, I woke up to find a group of neighbors standing on the edge of my driveway. 6 of them, all looking a little confused, holding identical envelopes. "You're Sawyer, right?" asked one of the men, mid-40s, khaki shorts, holding a leash with no dog. "Yeah," I said. "What's going on?" He handed me his envelope. Inside was a letter from the HOA offering early buyout options for their properties to streamline community alignment. The offer was conditional, only available if owners agreed to voluntarily annex into the HOA's jurisdiction. "How many of you got this?" I asked. All 6 raised their hands. "This is their backup plan," Olivia said later that day after reading the documents. "They're trying to clean up before the investigation catches up. If they get homeowners to retroactively agree to annexation, they'll argue the boundaries were always fluid. But they didn't offer it to me. No, they already tried to take yours by force. You're the anchor. If they get you, the rest fall." That night, I held a meeting in my yard. I set up string lights, dragged out folding chairs, and passed around copies of my documentation. I showed them the original deed, the survey lines, and a copy of the lien they tried to place on me. I explained the federal investigation. I told them what could happen if they signed anything. "They've already hurt people," I said. "They've forced families out. They're not trying to build a community. They're trying to build an empire." Silence. Then the man in the khaki shorts, Bill, raised his hand. "What can we do?" "We organize," Olivia said. "We file a collective complaint and we get coverage." The next morning, a reporter from the regional news outlet arrived with a camera crew. This time, I didn't confront the HOA. I let my neighbors do the talking. An older woman named Mrs. Petrov, who had lived there for 30 years, spoke first. "They fined me $500 because my bird feeder was non-compliant. I paid it. I was scared." Bill held up his letter. "They told me my fence was 3 inches too high and threatened to sue. This buyout, it feels like extortion." One by one, they told their stories. Falsified fines, unexplained dues, threats of lawsuits, HOA board members showing up at odd hours to inspect their fences. The footage aired that night, and the fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, Deborah Langston resigned as HOA president. She released a statement claiming it was for personal reasons, but the timing was obvious. The new interim president, a sheepish-looking dentist named Carl, issued a half-baked apology and promised a full internal audit of the HOA's actions. But it was too late. The federal agents returned the next day with warrants. This time they weren't asking questions. They seized computers, financial records, and hard drives from the HOA office. Oakage Estates really was shut down pending investigation, and the 4 board members who had signed off on the lien program were named in a formal indictment for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and attempted property theft. I watched from my porch as the black SUVs pulled out of the cul-de-sac. Carl tried to wave. I didn't wave back. A week later, I got a letter from the county confirming that the fraudulent lien had been expunged from the record. I framed it and hung it near the front door, not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted every person who entered that house to know exactly what we'd fought off and exactly what we built instead. The sun had barely cleared the trees a few days later when a delivery truck rumbled up the gravel and dropped off a certified letter addressed to me. The envelope was from the county recorder's office, but the return address had been tampered with. A sticker was haphazardly slapped over the original. I peeled it off and saw the Oakage Estates HOA seal faintly beneath. Inside was a copy of a corrective property plat, stamped and notarized. According to this new document, my entire lot had been reintegrated into the HOA zoning map through a clerical adjustment signed by a notary who, according to Olivia's quick background check, had been dead for 6 years. I passed the paper to Olivia, who read it twice and didn't say anything for a full minute. "They forged government documents," she said finally. "They used a dead notary seal to file a fake plat adjustment." I stared at her. "That's what a felony." She picked up her phone. 4 of them: mail tampering, forgery, filing a false public record, and conspiracy. That morning, Olivia called the district attorney's office and handed off everything: the altered plat, the fake seal, and the mail tampering. Within hours, they escalated the case to the state level. The fraudulent plat had been filed into the official county record, which meant the HOA had attempted to rewrite legal boundaries through document forgery. The next day, the county office closed its doors for a surprise audit. I heard later that a clerk had flagged the adjustment the moment it came in, but an administrator, also a member of the HOA, had pushed it through anyway. Now that administrator was on administrative leave pending investigation. By midweek, state police raided Oakage Estates' clubhouse. They left with 3 file boxes, 2 computers, and the contents of a locked cabinet that, according to one of the agents, had been off limits to anyone but the board president. Deborah's name was all over the files. One document, a typed memo marked confidential, outlined a plan to absorb non-compliant parcels for future development leverage. I didn't need to guess what that meant. Back at the farmhouse, I was finishing the upstairs railing when Olivia came in holding her laptop. "They've started unsealing the communications," she said, sitting on the edge of the work table. "Emails, board meeting transcriptions, call logs. And it's worse than you think." I set the drill down. How much worse? They were coordinating with a private developer. A big one. The kind that builds those massive, gated communities. My stomach dropped. To do what? Buy up surrounding parcels under the table, flip them, and file liens on properties that resisted. Your farmhouse was supposed to be a proof of concept. Take the land, claim jurisdiction, then resell it to the developer under a revitalization clause. They wanted to bulldoze it, or worse, turn it into a community center to justify the annexation. They referred to your lot as the keyhole to the corridor. I looked out the upstairs window. Beyond the tree line, I could see the HOA's manicured hedges, perfectly symmetrical, flanked by matching mailboxes. They were going to erase the whole history of this place just to build more condos, I said. They still might try, Olivia said, but now they'll have to do it from inside a courtroom. A week later, subpoenas were issued to the private developer, 2 HOA board members, and Deborah Langston herself. Deborah had gone quiet. No public comments, no appearances at meetings, not even a whisper of legal defense. That changed when the state attorney announced that a grand jury had been convened. On the day of her indictment, a neighbor knocked on my door. Her name was Marlene, and she lived 2 lots down in an old ranch-style home with faded blue shutters. She looked nervous. "I thought you should see this," she said, handing over a manila folder. Inside were copies of emails between Deborah and the developer. Deborah had used Marlene's Wi-Fi during a garden club meeting to send them. She asked for the password. Marlene explained, said she needed to send a quick zoning map. I didn't think anything of it. One of the emails was a scanned agreement. Deborah had promised the developer clear title to all non-aligned parcels within 36 months, including mine. In return, she'd get a board seat and a share of the profits from any future sale. I gave the folder to Olivia, who added it to the growing mountain of evidence. The case had snowballed into something much bigger than a property dispute. It was now a full-scale corruption probe. 2 weeks later, the indictments dropped. It was a waterfall. Deborah, 5 counts of property fraud, 2 counts of document forgery, 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. 3 other board members charged with aiding and abetting obstruction and knowingly participating in the falsification of public records. The administrator from the county office indicted for abuse of public office and tampering with land records. The developer under investigation for bribery and conspiracy. The trial date was set for the end of the summer. As the farmhouse reached completion, so did the neighborhood's transformation. The HOA's influence had collapsed. With the board gutted, the remaining members voted to dissolve the existing leadership structure and form a new residential committee with open elections, term limits, and mandatory transparency. They asked me to run. I declined. Instead, I nominated Marlene. She won by a landslide. I spent the next month finishing the trim work, rebuilding the barn doors, and planting a vegetable garden where the survey stakes had once littered the ground. One afternoon, as I was hammering in the final fence post, a car pulled up along the roadside. A young couple stepped out, maybe in their early 30s, holding hands. "Is this the farmhouse?" the man asked. "Sure is," I said, wiping my hands. "It's beautiful. I saw it on the news. We're thinking of renovating something similar." "You did all this yourself?" I nodded. Took a while, but worth every minute. He looked around at the wraparound porch, the weathered beams, the new paint warmed by the evening sun. No HOA, right? I grinned. Not anymore. They laughed, waved, and walked back to their car. That night, I sat on the porch with Olivia as the sky turned to ash and rose. The wind carried the scent of cedar and fresh soil. It's done, she said. Feels like it, I replied. We sat in silence for a moment, just listening to the cicadas. We didn't just save a house, I said, looking at the new porch light illuminating the framed letter from the county. We exposed a system built on intimidation and proved that even the most powerful-seeming HOA isn't above the law. That farmhouse stands for every homeowner who's ever been pushed around and decided to push back. Olivia raised her glass of iced tea. To pushing back. To pushing back. The farmhouse stood exactly where it had always been, strong, unbroken, unclaimed by false authority. And this time, no one was ever taking it again.